What's up, folks? This one's going to be a super exciting ride because today we're talking about the one and only Nosferatu. Often depicted as a nightmarish creature, Nosferatu in popular culture is a Romanian word for vampire. However, there is no factual evidence suggesting the existence of it in Romanian language, so technically it's a made-up word. An embodiment of evil, he became the topic of popular discussion decades ago, but still, there's always something new that crops up about him. Whether he's directly related to Dracula or what cryptic language he uses, the mystery is never ending. Okay, enough beating around the bush. Get ready to uncover 15 terrifying facts about this sinister creature which you probably did not know before. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Was Nosferatu a blatant ripoff of Dracula? In 1922, people gathered in the Marble Hall of Berlin Zoological Garden to watch a movie, but little did they know that they were experiencing something that would change horror movies forever. Nosferatu, a symphony of horror, was one of the earliest films to introduce vampires on the big screen. Creepy shadows on walls, a monster with bat ears and long fingers, and the creature's visceral reaction to sunlight were all extremely new to how audiences perceive horror movies. However, all this innovation could not change the fact that it was not an original story, but a direct ripoff of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula. To make matters more complicated, the adaptation wasn't even authorized. The movie opens in a similar way to the novel, where a young clerk reaches a castle in the mountains to meet a wealthy count and eventually discovers that his host sleeps in a coffin under the building. However, there were indeed some changes made in the silent German expressionist film. The plot, character names, and locations were altered. Count Dracula became Count Orlok. Jonathan Harker was changed to Thomas Hutter, and Mina Harker became Ellen Hutter. The location, too, was shifted from London in the book to the fictional German town Wisborg in the movie. In spite of these changes, the movie is celebrated as one of the greatest vampire films ever made. As a symbol of creative freedom, director F.W. Murnau even changed the climax. However, despite Murnau's excellent job with the cinematography and camera work, the film got buried under a legal battle due to copyright infringement. I mean, as iconic as it was, it probably shouldn't have existed. Sadly, the inevitable happened, and soon all prints of Nosferatu were destroyed, except a few. The production company, too, was bankrupted due to the court proceedings. While producer Alban Grau claimed to have gotten the idea from his personal experience, he still used the main story of the novel, either believing that it wouldn't be discovered in Germany until the next 50 years, or they simply couldn't convince Bram Stoker's wife, Florence, to approve the project. They irrespectively went ahead with the movie, thinking no one would care, only to be entangled in the greatest adaptation court case in history. Though removed from its home country, the movie resurfaced in the United States and went on to become a cult favorite among horror lovers, proving the same story in different hands can create wonders. How did the film's ending break horror traditions? Murnau's Nosferatu featured a climax that challenged the typical horror traditions. Bold move indeed, but highly successful. Count Orlok, the movie version of Count Dracula, was killed by a woman, Ellen, instead of a group of victorious men who hunted him down with knives and blades, as shown in the original story. Portraying a woman of pure heart as the ultimate symbol of power who can lure the vampire into a deadly trap till dawn was indeed a major diversion from Stoker's novel. Realizing that she's the only one who could save everyone from the vampire's wrath, Ellen voluntarily gets bewitched and lets Orlok feed on her, who in the process loses track of time and evaporates in the first rays of sunlight. A triumphant Ellen then dies in her husband's arms. Ellen's death does not make her a mere pawn or a victim, but rather strengthens her character and sets up a tone for all female leads to follow. It was her choice to take matters into her own hands and kill the monster, accepting self-sacrifice as a win. Taking a heroic last stand is a quality mostly attributed to male protagonists, but Nosferatu should definitely be credited for breaking the stereotypes and giving agency to a woman in a horror movie. Talk about girl power. Did Max Shrek stay in character on and off set? Max Shrek, the legendary actor who played Count Orlok, is applauded for an extraordinary performance in Nosferatu, setting an example of how one role can mark the beginning of a legacy for an actor. His performance, exaggerated appearance like the skeletal frame and gaunt, was deeply rooted in German expressionism. Shrek did not just act, but he lived the role, becoming a physical manifestation of the monster in the dark. His commitment to the role is commendable. While character acting is kind of common for actors nowadays, back in the 1920s, it was not even thought of. Shrek used a method acting approach and reportedly stayed in character all the time, even when the cameras were not rolling. Even the cast members and crew never saw him without full makeup and costume. Shrek was a professional stage actor whose personal life was barely revealed to anyone. In fact, his solitary nature earned him the ill will that he might actually be a vampire. The rumor worked well for the movie and added to the ominous nature of Orlok. Interestingly, the gossip went on to be fictionalized in the 2000 film Shadow of a Vampire. His performance felt so real that it was unsettling. Shrek's immersive acting has been parodied and used as a reference in various other shows and media, solidifying his performance as a forever classic. Even today, filmmakers and actors take inspiration from his work. How many sets did the production build, and why so many? Sure, regular movies may build a dozen sets, but there is nothing regular about a Nosferatu movie. The 2024 version of Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers, turned out to be yet another outstanding piece of work. Eggers, who had been planning on this creation for a long time, was particularly obsessed with details and designs. It resulted in the building of a whopping 60 sets by designer Craig Lathrop. Yes, you heard that right. Eggers had a huge variety of sets constructed and claimed that almost all the sets had something unusual and special about them. Though none of the sets were exactly plumb or square, each added a unique character to the narrative. Most of the sets were built in the Barrandov studio in Prague, and due to Eggers' desire for full creative freedom, 5 city blocks were constructed in the studio itself, including the streets of Wisborg's fictional Baltic town. This was the largest set depicting the streets of Old Town and had medieval houses with a certain slump. Eggers also manipulated the dressing and color palette to show its transition from a bustling center to a plague-ridden town. Eggers further explained that a large number of sets gave him and the cameraman more control. However, there were technical difficulties, as sets often came apart on hinges in the middle of a take. Nonetheless, the director is the boss, and his wish for atmospheric setting and architectural control ruled the entire filming. Were the props and letters in the film fully functional? Robert Eggers' fascination with details was so intense that you would probably miss out on a lot of them in the first watch. The props used in the film were not just decorative, but actually functional to give a captivating experience. He made sure that every costume used had an antiquated look, including vintage pendants. For example, Ellen's heart-shaped locket could actually be opened to keep a lock of hair. Eggers even got Orlok's carriage custom-made for the film with carvings of Vlad the Impaler battle. Crazy, right? Even his ring, the furniture, and paperworks were all meticulously crafted to match the historical period. Orlok's coffin also had Dacian dragons to establish the Gothic influence in the film. Moreover, the towns were also given a shade of shabbiness to fit the story, and more importantly, to align with the time period. Yet another exciting detail was the letters in the movie. A simple note paper on the desk was written in such a manner that it appeared to be a letter from Ellen. Emma Corrin, a cast member herself, mentioned that the papers on the desk were arranged very carefully, and each envelope was addressed with her character's name. That's not all. Discussions with the cast and crew revealed that the director even used live rats in close-up shots with a mix of visual effects to create the rat-infested ship scene. However, for larger areas, they used mats with realistic-looking rat toys for the swarming effect. Craig Lathrop even ended up coining the prop as a rat mat. Eggers also used practical set design, prosthetics, and costume making to create the perfect 1800s Gothic aura. As they say, the devil is always in the details. Were Ellen's bloody tears created with early special effects? The haunting scene where Ellen cries tears of blood was not filmed using any special effects, but were her actual tears. So how did Eggers manage to do that? He took practical production techniques to a whole new level in this shot. In order to create an authentic ambience, Eggers had the makeup artist, Tracy Loader, pull strings to make Ellen cry tears of blood. Tracy used an eye blood liquid on Lily Rose Depp to achieve the possessed look. She also said that it was difficult to control the liquid, and hence the shot we see has 2 blood-red lines of tears. A simple trick, and horror bled through the screen, quite literally. What language did Orlok use to haunt Ellen's dreams? In an attempt to uphold historical accuracy, Robert Eggers not only resurrected Count Orlok, but also revived a dead language. An ancient Indo-European language, Dacian, which was once spoken by the people of modern-day Romania, was used as Orlok's language to highlight his primeval descent. The Dacian language predates even the Roman Empire, and Eggers explained that using it for Orlok gave him a timeless appearance, establishing him as an ancient relic. Using Dacian in the movie was not an easy journey. Eggers took the help of various historians and linguists specializing in extinct Balkan languages to reconstruct Dacian with whatever little records of it exist in Greek and Latin documents. He also onboarded a Romanian translator, Florin Naserescu, to help with the translation. If you were confused about what Orlok was saying to Ellen in her nightmares, it is this language that he was speaking in. The use of Dacian was not only limited to dialogues, but integrated into the movie's background music. This can be particularly heard in the choir chanting scene where composer Mark Corvin had to collaborate with linguists to combine Dacian in modern music. However, the entire effort of bringing back a language from the dead would have been a waste if Bill Skarsgård had not delivered a brilliant performance. Bill put his heart and soul into the role and vigorously trained to deliver his dialogues in this reconstructed language. It is undeniable that his use of a guttural, trembling voice and stretched-out syllables defined Count Orlok's mystic nature. Did the film's score feature unique, ancient instruments? Eggers did not want to create a soundtrack merely for pleasing the ears. His mission was to use music in a manner that would reflect the eerie and otherworldly landscape of the film. He believed that creating something original to play on the sets would help the cast and crew absorb themselves in the particular era. Coming up with a gothic background score was not an easy feat. Eggers thus bagged Robin Carolan as his music composer after their successful venture in The Northman. No wonder Carolan is one of the best in the business, but even had a difficult time perfecting the music that in itself would be enough to haunt. The movie used a vast orchestra with about 60 string players, horns and woodwinds, and a full choir. Letty Scott, one of the UK's greatest French horn players, helped in collecting and using ancient pipes and horns to match the mystic atmosphere of the 1800s. However, Carlin mentioned that though he could use some contemporary instruments, he had to make sure to not make the music sound too modern. The group also included a harpist and 2 percussionists. Interestingly, using a music box at the start of the film seemed to be the most challenging part for the composer. It did not stop at just gathering ancient and obscure musical instruments. The music also featured custom-made instruments like a tuwaka-like device. It was similar to a percussion and was personally constructed by the percussionist Paul Clarvis. The entire crew had one aim: to make music that would mirror the tragic and melancholic themes of the film, unlike any typical horror score. Was Orlok's appearance inspired by real-world fears? Back in 1922, producer Alban Grau had no references to previous vampire films to draw from. He set up Prana Film, an independent studio where he worked closely with the director Murnau to come up with a visual representation of the Nosferatu. Given how grim and somber the character was, Grau had to retain some of the elements from Stoker's novel to justify Orlok's appearance. However, apart from the long ears and an eagle-like nose, Grau mostly drew from Eastern European folklore to display his brainchild. Being a researcher of supernatural forces, Grau was heavily influenced by an interaction with a peasant while serving for the German army on the Serbian front during World War I. The farmer first told him about encountering a vampire in Romania, which they called the undead or Nosferatu, sowing the first seeds of curiosity in him. Fun fact, his sketches of Orlok with glowing eyes and a demonic alien appearance are even scarier than the film's version. Grau's ultimate creation was something like the audience had never witnessed before. Looking more like an animal with sunken eyes, bushy eyebrows, a hooked nose, and teeth like a rodent's incisor instantly made him a recognizable monster. Adding to Grau's artistic excellence, Murnau brilliantly used Orlok's shadow, outlining his bald head, hunched back, and sickly thin body. In no time, Orlok went on to become the scariest thing to ever exist in cinema. However, many critics believe that Orlok's appearance was not just based on a one-off interaction Grau had. Rather, his look is a manifestation of the horrors and traumas of the war, a concept Grau refers to as cosmic vampire, hinting at it being a symbol of impending doom. Grau himself said that the bloodthirsty Nosferatu is similar to the deadly terror that has been unleashed upon the world to drink the blood of millions of men. Even Murnau and Max Shrek served in the trenches, and presumably their art was a reflection of post-traumatic stress. Shrek's colleagues confirmed this, stating that he mostly kept to himself and often disappeared for hours in the forest. In the words of the film critic Lotte Eisner, Germany's culture of mysticism and dark magic emerged on the battlefields when death was knocking at their doors, and this determined the creation of cinema's very first vampire. Moreover, Orlok's vermin-like features are believed to be a reference to the wartime Spanish flu pandemic, which severely affected Germany. This idea is confirmed when Count Orlok is accompanied by plague-carrying rats on a ship from Transylvania to Germany, just like the popular belief that U.S. troops carried it with themselves to Europe. Yet some others believe that the Count's ratty look was more of an anti-Semitic caricature. Whatever the inspiration may have been, Grau created the scariest monster of horror cinema. Did producer Alban Grau's occult interests shape the film? Alban Grau was extremely fascinated with occultism and mystical studies. He was a member of the German magical group, the Fraternitas Saturni, under the name of Master Pasidius. Thus, Nosferatu was not just a film, but an expression of his passion. I believe that completely changes how we saw the film till now. Grau made sure to rely on mythical texts and scholarly documents to bring Orlok to life. Along with Murnau, he crafted Nosferatu to have a demonic ancestry and occult lineage, and therefore the Count is a creation of a satanic archdemon, Belial. He is linked to the bubonic plague in Psalm 41:8-10, and that explains why we see Orlok as an embodiment of the Black Death, with rats coming out of his coffin and swarming the streets of Wisborg. According to the Old Testament, Belial is summoned by Goetic sorcerers, which defines Orlok as a practitioner of dark magic before becoming a vampire. The occult connections are further strengthened in the film when Orlok uses an ancient angelic language, Enochian, to exchange documents with his servant, Nock. Grau sourced the language from private journals of an English magician, John Dee, and his assistant, Edward Kelly, who developed it in the Elizabethan period to contact angels. Grau's obsession with the occult also decided the shaping of the character of Professor Bulwer. Firstly, the very name of the character is derived from an English occultist writer, Edward Bulwer Lytton. Ellen's sacrifice in the film to prevent the spread of plague by destroying Orlok clearly illustrates this idea. The idea of occultism became so deeply intertwined with the film that it paved its way into the personal lives of the crew, and director Murnau's grave became a site of an occult pilgrimage. In a bizarre incident that shook the internet in 2015, Murnau's skull was found stolen from his grave with residues of wax around, suggesting some satanic rituals. Did the crew face real-life danger during filming? If you thought that the 2024 Nosferatu by Robert Eggers was the only official remake of the original film, you're mistaken. In 1979, German director Werner Herzog had already made Nosferatu the Vampire. The remake was pretty faithful to Murnau's version, and Herzog even tried to shoot it in Wismar, like Murnau, but failed to do so. He then chose to film in Delft, a historic and clean town in the Netherlands. However, the decision wasn't really good for the residents of the town. In order to shoot the infamous rat infestation scene, Herzog planned to import 10,000 rats. He justified his move by claiming that the rats were a decisive part of the film, and their invasion should instill a sense of anonymous fear among the community. However, things soon became difficult for the crew. The rats were stored in a barn outside the town and were taken care of by 2 female biologists. It was soon discovered that the owner of the barn was not feeding them properly, causing them to slowly die. On being questioned about this, the farmer threw the biologists out and refused to allow the production access to the rats. Unfortunately, this happened right when Herzog had finally found a way to film the scene. What followed was an intense confrontation between Herzog and his team against a group of farmers who yielded all kinds of farming tools as weapons. The workmen also ensured to block their exit by horizontally parking a large fan in the driveway. Now, that seems like a movie in itself. A horrible fight ensued, with broken windscreens and damaged cars. The crew was also severely beaten and wounded, and Herzog himself faced a near-death experience when a farmer tried to drive a crane at him. Nonetheless, the crew emerged victorious and was able to retrieve the rats and finish filming. He then sold the rats to laboratories, and the production went ahead to Czechoslovakia. Who knew the real horror wasn't the vampire, but a brawl over rats? Are there occult symbols hidden in the film's documents? Grau did not just use Enochian for Orlok's documents. He also used hermetic symbols and alchemical codes related to a specific kind of magic. Basically, these were wingdings of the 16th century, consisting of arrows, shapes, and symbols in place of letters. We can also find cleverly hidden occult symbols in various illustrations in the film. In a letter, an all-seeing eye with an owl, scorpion, and stag can be seen, which are all hermetic symbols. The love for including occult themes in Nosferatu movies reached a new height when director Robert Eggers made his remake in 2024. Here, Count Orlok no longer has those rabbit teeth or goblin ears from Shrek's original look. Rather, he now appears to be a distinguished gentleman from the Middle Ages, donning a suit and thick mustache. The 2024 version used elements of Solomonic magic, a type of sorcery related to King Solomon, who, according to the Christian tradition, wrote down his wisdom, which went on to become valuable texts for occultists. Eggers' use of Solomonic elements became evident in Orlok's backstory. Once a magician, he gave himself to the dark forces to gain power and ended up becoming a monstrous entity. Moreover, a scene from the trailer showed an ornate spellbook featuring symbols that almost looked like real Solomonic seals. These symbols again appear on Orlok's sarcophagus and across other props in the movie. So whether it's Grau's cryptic hieroglyphics or Eggers' Solomon-inspired magic, Nosferatu has always found a way to reimagine horror in a mystical nature. The premiere of Nosferatu was followed by a costume party in 1922. The movie's haunting atmosphere was not just restricted to the screen. The makers held a costume party at the same location as the premiere, in Berlin Zoological Garden on March 4, 1922. The guests were asked to attend the masquerade ball dressed as Biedermeier-era costumes to match the film's setting in 1838. The event, known as the Festival of Nosferatu, began with Max Shrek's speech, which was inspired by the tragic play Goethe's Faust. That's not all. Shrek appeared fully in Orlok's costume and character to deliver the speech to linger the movie's spooky vibe. This was followed by a live orchestra performing a piece from Heinrich Marschner's 1828 opera Der Vampir. The music and period-centric costumes were deliberately chosen to give the guests an immersive horror experience that stays long after the end of the film. Reportedly, some guests could not shrug off the emotional imprint of the film, and though they danced or tried to bite their dates jokingly, an uneasy air of fear lurked amidst the merriment. However, makers claimed that the event was not as grand as they expected it to be. They faced various challenges, like constructing a set or giving the crew enough time to rehearse. Nonetheless, the eerie atmosphere of the party, with guests roaming about the halls of Berlin Zoo in exotic costumes, was more than just an after-party. It was an immersive horror experience. That night, the guests did not just leave with memories and photographs, they left with an echo of fear. Was there any scientific research behind Orlok's look? In the 2024 adaptation of Nosferatu, director Robert Eggers did not leave any stone unturned to achieve the perfect cinematic experience. He appointed makeup artist David White, who is known for creating realistic looks using detailed prosthetics. To create the look of Orlok, Eggers and David carried out extensive research on the decomposition of human flesh and bone and studied dozens of medical books and historical documents. Since Orlok is essentially dead, they wanted to create a look that would show his decayed body as well as fit the character. The vigorous scientific research helped Eggers and White decide which parts of Orlok's body should appear as preserved and which parts should show signs of decay. David claims that though Orlok was dead, he had to have a sense of power, and this idea drove his design. As a result, his upper body had to be more muscular than that of an average corpse. Tricky, huh? To fulfill this seemingly impossible task, David went through various anatomical illustrations of the 17th century, which often depicted the muscles and bone structures in a frightening manner. Eggers also helped him by sharing images of ancient noblemen, their facial hair and hairstyles, including references from folk art. David and Eggers could finally balance the scientific accuracy of human body decay and successfully delivered a haunting yet romanticized version of Nosferatu on screen, who is both terrifying and tragic. Marvelous verdict. And it's time for a wrap, folks. The character of Nosferatu has always been shrouded with mystery, and no matter how much we try to unravel it, something or the other remains in the shadows. Nevertheless, peeling these 15 terrifying facts layer by layer has indeed been one hell of a ride. From occultism to real rat infestations to eerie after-parties, every remake of Nosferatu is its own brand of horror. The deeper we dig, the darker the secret. Maybe that is true horror. Let us know in the comments below which fact intrigued you the most. Bye-bye now. I'll see you in the next one.